Tenants and advocates are pushing for new laws that will make it difficult or impossible for landlords to evict tenants so that they can renovate their properties. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting topic for you today, and it's going over something they call renovictions. Basically, in a lot of cases, landlords will have to remove tenants in order to do major repairs to properties, right? And sometimes they will go ahead and let leases that are about to end expire and just won't renew them. Sometimes they will say, hey, we need to actually physically remove this tenant, through the eviction process, right? And depending on what state you're in, it's easier than other states, depending on what the laws are in your state to actually do that, right? But most states, they do put into the law that says, hey, landlords have the right to come in there and fix their properties up so that they can rent them out for more money. Most states. Now, I'm not talking about the most extreme, anti-landlord states here. I'm talking about the grand majority of states where they still believe that, hey, a landlord does have the right to keep their properties in good shape. So now, though, they are pushing for more of these laws that say, "Hey, no, these people are losing their housing. It's not fair." Well, here's the problem, right? When you start pushing more laws like this that make it harder for landlords to renovate, right? What do you think is going to happen? Okay, the renovations we're planning aren't going to get done, which means that the property is going to fall into disrepair. Okay, it's going to look like garbage. It's going to be garbage. And the only reason that the tenants are living there right now probably is because the rents are cheap. Okay, and they don't want to pay extra rent after we renovate the property. You know what? I don't like these sort of laws where they say, hey, landlords should have to keep their rents cheap so that these people can live cheap forever. No, that's dumb. That's what we call rent control. Okay, and these strong eviction protections that don't allow landlords to renovate, well, they're a quasi rent control as well because they will keep the prices artificially low because the properties aren't in good shape. Oh man. So yeah, up in New Hampshire, they're pushing a new law, and it's not outright banning the practice just yet, but it is a move in that direction. That's why I'm bringing this article to you today. Okay. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think. Do you believe landlords should be able to evict the tenant in order to renovate a property? This is a pretty simple question, right? And for the landlords on here, I already know the answer. Of course, yes, landlords should be able to renovate the property and raise the rents. And regardless of what you say, like, oh, well, they're not doing much, they're not doing that much work. Well, how easy is it to even paint a unit or replace the carpeting in a unit when you've got somebody living in there and they've got furniture everywhere, they've got their stuff everywhere, you can't get a crew in there to do that kind of work, okay? It is darn near impossible unless you remove the tenant from the property. Regardless of how long it takes or how big the job is, in a lot of cases, it's easier if the unit is empty. Oh, man. Anyway, let's get into this article. This article is coming from the concordmonitor.com, and it says, removed for renovations. When a landlord wants to repair, tenants are displaced in a tight rental market. Yeah, and that is unfortunate, right? But what is the option? It's not the landlord's fault that the market is tight. It's not. It's not our fault that the market is tight. Simply put, there just aren't enough rentals out there for everybody right now, and we still have the right to make improvements to our investment. So, anyway, let's get into this article and see what it says. Leah Fagan and Andrew Mason know when you live in a place for 6 years, you collect a lot of stuff. They learned this the hard way after unexpectedly packing up and moving out of their two-bedroom Concord apartment on short notice because their landlord wanted to renovate their unit. Last October, they were served a notice that their lease would not be renewed and they had to vacate within 30 days. They were able to negotiate to stay until the end of January, but they still had to pack up all of their belongings and go. Fagan and Mason had about 90 days to accomplish what seemed like an impossible feat, finding a new apartment within the same $1,200 price range of their previous unit in a safe neighborhood with all the charm they adored for 6 years. See, and there we go right there, right? It's like, oh, well, it's not fair that the landlord is not renewing these people's lease because they won't be able to find something that they can afford. I'm like, well, that is because, simply put, one, the landlord had the rents set too low, okay? And it wasn't going for the market rate. These people probably had a really good deal. And rather than saving the extra money that they were saving on rent so that going forward, they could find a place that, is more expensive, they just said, screw it, we're just going to spend the money however we see fit, thinking that they had a right to stay there for however long as possible, right? So, this isn't an eviction. Okay, this is just the landlord saying, "Hey, we're not gonna, renew your lease." That's not an eviction, not in my opinion, but according to a lot of the more progressive anti-landlord cities and localities, that is an eviction. I don't understand the terminology. I think they're using the terminology to confuse people so that they can sway them towards what they want to happen. But yeah, it's still not cool. Yeah, these people, they had to move, right? But this is the life of when you're renting a property. And the best way to ensure that this sort of thing doesn't happen to you is to buy. Okay, that's why I encourage everybody, if you want to stay somewhere long term, and these people stayed 6+ years renting, so they obviously wanted to stay somewhere long term, then it's better to, work towards purchasing something. The hot real estate market led to a flood of new landlords wanting to renovate their new buildings and raise rents, which forced out existing tenants in the process. It's become a common pattern New Hampshire legal assistance has seen time and time again in the last year. It's perfectly legal, but in a tight housing market with steep prices and limited availability, finding a new place to live in 30 days or less can be next to impossible. In an attempt to find a happy medium between landlords who want to improve their properties and tenants who need a roof over their heads, 10 Democrat lawmakers have sponsored a bill, HB 401, that would give renters 60 days notice of an intent to renovate in order to give them a better chance to find a new place to live. So yeah, right now landlords only have to give 30 days notice, but they want to extend that to 60 days, right? And eventually they'll want to extend it further and further. And you've seen this in places like Washington State or up in Seattle, where, it just gets extended further and further, and they make it harder and harder for landlords to evict. They make it harder and harder for landlords to make money. And, it's a slippery slope. That's why we have to nip it in the bud before it gets to that level. Okay, so 30 days is plenty of time, and that's the truth, right? The main thing that I say is that make sure that the property owners, the landlords, have the right to do repairs to their properties. If you start taking those rights away, you will see the disrepair, you will see the lack of investment in your state, and that's not what you want. Believe me, it's already a tight rental market. You want it to be even tighter, because that's what will happen. An unexpected move. Fagan and Mason knew their two-bedroom unit needed numerous renovations. They talked about the need for a shower repair, a cracked window, and a leaky fridge with their landlord just over a year ago. The landlord had just purchased the building and conducted a walkthrough of each unit with the current tenants. They agreed to a monthly rent increase of $200, but were grateful to remain in the building despite an ownership change, said Fagan. So, yeah, you know what? I always laugh because they always say, oh, well, the new landlords, they come in here and they immediately want to renovate and raise rents. And I'm like, yeah, maybe you don't understand how real estate investment works, but um, the majority of landlords, when we purchase properties, we want to renovate the property and raise rents, right? So that we can get a return on our investment. That is the whole thing that we are doing when we are buying the property. If we cannot raise the rents, or if we cannot, add value to the property to get, to make a profit, then it's not a good investment, and therefore we won't buy it. they almost seem like flabbergasted by, wow, I can't believe this new landlord came in here, and the paltry rent that I was paying for the last 6 years, it isn't enough. I mean, why can't he just accept that? Well, like I've mentioned before, the new landlord, they're not purchasing the property for the same price that the previous landlord paid. Okay. So, just as an example, right? If you are purchasing a duplex, right, your duplex is costing you $300,000, but you're purchasing it from a person who bought it for $150,000 10 years ago. Well, they had a mortgage on a $150,000 property. Okay. They had a different interest rate on that mortgage. And, the whole thing is different. They have a different insurance provider. After the sale of the property, you might also face a higher property tax bill. If they had property management, you might have a different management company that charges more or less. Who knows, right? Basically, what I'm saying is that all the expenses for a new owner are going to be completely different than that for the old owner. So the rent the old owner was charging, they might have been able to make a nice healthy profit off of. That exact same rent for the new owner is a losing. Okay, they're losing money every single month, which is why new owners come in and they say, hey, this is how we add value and this is how we get the rents to go up. Okay, so I know that a lot of tenants don't understand that because they're just naive to the ways of investing. But you know what? That's why I keep trying to explain it in these videos. I hope that some tenants are actually watching this stuff and say, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense." Now that I do the math, what? Yeah, they actually did need to raise the rents because they weren't going to make a profit. But anyway, yeah, I hope that this doesn't become worse for the landlords, and that landlords throughout the country are continued to allow um, they allow us to renovate our properties. If we need to evict tenants to do so, that's just a necessary fact. Okay. And I don't, like I said, I don't consider this a eviction. They go into the long details of the story, the hard up story of these tenants. I don't have time for all of that, but just keep in mind that hey, you might see something like this where you invest and where you live sometime soon.